Jenna Hartley, the receptionist asked, peering over the rim of her glasses. You're the temp from Ridgefield Staffing? Yes, that's me, Jenna said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear and adjusting her blazer. It was a little too big. It belonged to her sister, and the sleeves swallowed her wrists, but it was the nicest thing she owned. She clutched her cheap tote bag like it was armor. The receptionist barely looked up. You're on floor 32, executive assistant support. Just fill in until their regular girl comes back from maternity leave. Don't mess anything up. Jenna forced a smile, gave a polite nod, and stepped into the elevator of Kallis Industries' glass and steel skyscraper. 32 floors up in Midtown Manhattan, her stomach twisted. She hadn't planned to be here. She had a degree in literature, not spreadsheets and scheduling. But after her bookstore shut down and rent still had to be paid, she'd taken the first thing that came her way. The elevator opened to a sleek lobby with white marble floors and a view that looked like it belonged in a movie. She blinked. It was so quiet up here, like the air had money in it. A woman approached her tall, wearing red stilettos and a fitted black dress. Jenna, right? I'm Dana. You'll be helping me with executive scheduling, mainly for Mr. Kallis, Jenna nodded. Of course, happy to help, Dana raised an eyebrow. You'll want to be sharp. He's not exactly warm and fuzzy. Jenna followed her into a corner office that looked like it belonged to a Bond villain, floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk the size of a small car, and not a single speck of dust anywhere. You'll sit here, Dana said, pointing to a smaller desk outside the office. He's away in Europe right now, but when he's back, just do your job, Jenna smiled again. I will. 3 days passed without a hitch. Jenna organized files, responded to emails, fetched coffee for Dana, and tried not to stare too long at the skyline. The other assistants barely spoke to her. She was a temp. No one cared to learn her name, but she didn't mind. She had rent to pay and no time for drama until Friday morning. The elevator doors opened and a man stepped out like he owned the entire city. Tall, tailored charcoal suit. Dark hair, slightly tousled like he didn't bother trying too hard. His jawline looked like it could cut glass. And his eyes, sharp, focused, intense, landed on her instantly. Who are you? Jenna stood so fast she nearly knocked over her coffee. I'm Jenna, temporary assistant. Dana said Dana's out sick, he cut in smoothly, walking past her and straight into the office. He didn't stop, didn't look back. Coffee black, no sugar, she blinked. That was him, Xander Kallis, the billionaire. She scrambled to get his coffee, almost spilling it as she rushed into his office and set it on the desk. He didn't look up from his laptop. You don't have to sprint. I'm not going to fire you for taking longer than 30 seconds. Her cheeks flushed. Sorry, just wanted to make a good impression. Now he looked up, his eyes narrowed slightly like he was trying to figure her out. Where did you work before this? A small bookstore. It closed. He leaned back in his chair. And now you're at one of the largest financial firms in the country. I'm good with details, she said, keeping her voice steady. Fast learner, I won't let you down. He stared at her for another long second, then nodded once. We'll see. 2 hours later, he handed her a list of calls to schedule. No assistants have ever managed to get all 5 of these people in the same room, but I need it done by noon. She stared at the list. Understood. She worked the phones like her life depended on it. And somehow by 11:56, she had confirmation from every single person. She knocked on his door. Yes, she handed him the printout. All 5, Tuesday, conference room B. He looked at it, then looked at her again. You did it. She nodded. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not cruel, not mocking, real. You're not just a temp, are you? She shrugged. I'm just trying to survive. He looked at her for a long moment, then, cancel my lunch with the board. Come with me instead, she blinked. Sorry, you earned it. Let's eat, she hesitated. I don't think I'm supposed to. I own the company, he said simply. I make the rules. She followed him down to a matte black car parked out front with a driver already waiting. He opened the door for her. She slid in, stunned. The seats were pure leather. The smell was expensive. They pulled up to a five-star restaurant with glass chandeliers and piano music playing softly in the background. She tried not to gape as a maitre d' led them to a private table by the window. He ordered for both of them. "You like salmon?" She nodded, still processing everything. He leaned back. "You're different." "How? You don't act like you're trying to impress me. You're not intimidated or fake." "I'm just tired," she said honestly. "Faking it takes energy I don't have any more," he laughed. Fair enough. They talked, about books, about music, about why she hated cubicles and he hated fake smiles, and for the first time since taking this job she felt seen. When he walked her back up to the office, he stopped outside the elevator. "You're not just a temp to me anymore," she stared at him. "What am I, then?" He looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't expected. "Someone I want to know more." The elevator dinged. The doors opened. She stepped in. Just before they closed, she said, "I'm not great at pretending." "So if you're not serious—" "I don't play games, Jenna," he said, and the doors closed between them. Jenna was halfway through typing up a vendor contract when her desk phone rang. "Mr. Kallis wants to see you," said a voice she didn't recognize. She hesitated for half a second, saving her work before rising. When she reached his office, the door was already cracked open. Xander stood at the wall of windows, arms folded behind his back, gaze locked on the skyline like it held the answer to a question he hadn't asked aloud. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, careful to keep her tone even. He turned, his expression unreadable. "I need you to come to Boston with me tomorrow," she blinked. "Boston, board meeting. One of our biotech acquisitions is falling apart. I'll need someone who can keep my schedule tight and filter out distractions." "I'm not really the travel type," she said slowly. "You are now," he replied. She crossed her arms. "Why not take someone else, someone permanent?" "Because they waste time trying to impress everyone in the room." "You don't, you get things done," she swallowed, pulse picking up. "What's the dress code?" He tilted his head slightly. "What do you have?" "Nothing that screams executive summit." He reached into his jacket and handed her a sleek black card. "Go to Locke and Blake on Madison. Tell them your name, everything will be taken care of." Her fingers closed around the card like it might vanish. "That's not necessary." "I don't do necessary," he said. "I do effective." She didn't know what stunned her more, the fact that he'd anticipated her hesitation, or that he'd already arranged for it before she had a chance to say no. The next afternoon, she stepped into the private jet at Teterboro. The dress they'd fitted her in was navy, structured, and made her look like she belonged somewhere far more expensive than her old studio apartment. She wasn't sure she recognized herself in the mirror. Xander looked up from his tablet as she boarded. "Punctual." "Impressive. You sound surprised," she said, settling into the seat across from him. "I'm not, but you are." She tightened the seatbelt. "I've never flown private before." His gaze didn't waver. "You adjust quickly." The flight was smooth, quiet, and filled with conversations that danced between sharp observations and unexpected honesty. "What did you want to be when you were 10? He asked at one point, setting aside his tablet. "A writer," she said without thinking. "But I realized I liked reading stories more than creating them." "Still," he said, watching her, "you notice things most people don't." She glanced at him. "What did you want to be?" He paused. "Someone who didn't have to want anything." The words hung there, heavier than the cabin air. A sleek black car met them on the tarmac. Jenna barely had time to process the speed at which they were whisked through the city before they arrived at a modern glass tower. The building bore Kallis Industries' name across the top. Inside the top-floor boardroom, the temperature dropped 5 degrees the moment Xander walked in. Executives shifted in their leather chairs. Jenna moved fast, setting out documents, adjusting the screen for the presentation, and quietly removing distractions as he spoke. He didn't look at her once during the meeting, but every time she anticipated what he needed: a document, a corrected figure, a perfectly timed interruption. She could feel him noticing. Afterward, as they stepped into the elevator, he finally said, "You saved me an hour back there." I noticed the CFO was about to start a tangent, figured you didn't have time for a lecture on protein mapping. He studied her face. You're wasted in temp work. I don't have your resume. That's not what I said. They rode in silence for a few moments until he added, dinner tonight, with the head of the acquisition team, you'll join me. She turned to him. Are you always this? Decisive. I don't act unless I'm sure. And you're sure about me? His eyes didn't leave hers. Yes. The restaurant was inside a converted brownstone with low lighting and a courtyard strung with lights above a tranquil fountain. Their table was tucked into a quiet corner. The executive they met, a wiry woman named Ellen, asked Jenna pointed questions throughout the meal. Jenna answered each one with calm precision. After dessert, Ellen leaned back. She's sharp. You keeping her? Working on it, Xander said without hesitation. As they stepped out into the warm Boston night, Jenna exhaled slowly. You didn't tell me I'd be interrogated. You passed. She glanced at him. What exactly is this? A test, he said plainly. For both of us. And what if I'd failed? I don't waste time on hypotheticals. They walked in silence until they reached the car. Before she opened the door, he said, You don't flinch when things shift around you. I've flinched before, just not in front of you. He studied her carefully. You're not intimidated by me. I don't think that's what you want, not really. That stopped him. He reached for the car door, then paused. You're right. Inside the car, she stared out the window as Boston's lights blurred past, her reflection faint in the glass. She didn't know what this was becoming, only that it was no longer just about a job, and that terrified her more than anything. Jenna stood in the hallway outside her apartment, staring at the envelope in her hands. It was embossed with the Kallis Industries seal, delivered by courier no more than an hour after their return from Boston. Inside, a formal offer of permanent employment executive liaison to the CEO with a salary that made her knees weak. She hadn't opened the door yet. She wasn't sure she could go inside and look at her furniture secondhand, chipped and crammed into a space barely bigger than a closet, and pretend this wasn't happening. Her phone rang. I assume you got the envelope. Xander's voice came through, lower than usual, almost cautious. I did, she said, staring at her name typed in clean serif font. Is this your way of saying I passed another test? No, he said. This isn't a test. She leaned against the wall, the paint cool through her blouse. You don't think it's a little fast, it's overdue. Jenna said nothing. There was a pause, then he added, I'm not asking you to say yes tonight. You didn't ask at all, technically. I never had to, he said quietly. You're already the only one I trust to stand next to me in a room full of people waiting for me to bleed. That silenced her. She went inside, set the envelope on the counter, and didn't touch it for the rest of the night. The next morning, she stepped into the building with her decision made. She didn't stop at her old desk. She took the elevator straight to the executive floor. When she walked into his office, he was standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear. He looked over the moment she entered. One glance. That was all it took to tell him everything. He ended the call without a word and set the phone down. I'm in, she said. He nodded once. Good, Jenna crossed her arms, but I want control over my schedule. I won't just be your shadow. You're not, he said. You're my right hand. And I want a clause added. If I decide this job isn't right for me, I can walk away. Done, she stepped closer. And I don't want you to treat me differently in front of others. His eyes didn't leave hers. Define differently. She didn't blink. No favoritism, no looks that make people ask questions. If this is going to work professionally, we have to separate it. He studied her for a long moment before saying, and if I don't want to separate it, her breath caught. I'm not asking you to decide right now, he said, echoing her own words. Just consider the possibility that what's between us doesn't need to be defined by the walls of this office. She left without responding. The next few weeks moved fast. Jenna's new role meant longer hours, higher stakes, and an office of her own with glass walls and a view of the river. She coordinated deals, neutralized PR issues before they reached Xander's desk, and fielded calls from people who suddenly seemed to think she mattered. But it wasn't the job that kept her up at night. It was the way Xander would pass her in the hallway and let his fingertips brush her sleeve, just barely. Or how, in meetings, he'd glance at her once, hold it for a second too long, then look away like it hadn't happened. He never crossed a line, but he hovered near it. One Thursday evening, after everyone else had cleared out, Jenna was still at her desk reviewing the final terms of an investment deal when the door to her office opened. Xander stepped inside, no jacket, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, tie loosened. He looked tired, not worn down but restless. "You're still here," he said. "I could say the same about you." He leaned against the frame. "I had a dinner meeting, ended early." She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Want to review the Westbridge agreement?" He didn't move. "I didn't come here for that." Jenna glanced at him. "Then why are you here?" He walked in, closed the door behind him. The soft click echoed between them. "I told myself I'd wait, that I'd give you space to settle into the role. Let you decide what this is on your own terms. And now I'm realizing I'm not good at waiting." She stood slowly, unsure whether to run or stay still. He stepped closer, voice low and steady. "You walked into my company like you didn't need anything from me, no angles, no games. You made me look at everything differently." Jenna's pulse pounded in her ears. "You're used to being wanted for your power, your money. And you're not afraid to tell me when I'm wrong," he said. "I don't know what that is exactly, but I know I don't want to lose it." Her voice was quiet. "This could complicate everything. It already has." They were close now, closer than they'd ever allowed themselves to be. She tilted her head just enough to search his face. "If we do this, there's no going back." "I don't want to go back." For a heartbeat, the room was still. Then she reached for his tie, not to pull him toward her but to straighten it. A deliberate act, a signal. "I'm not interested in being a secret," she said. "You won't be, and I'm not changing who I am for you." A flicker of something real moved through his gaze. "I wouldn't ask you to." She stepped back, putting the desk between them again. "Then I guess we'll see what happens." He didn't argue. He nodded, turned, and walked out without another word, but the next morning there was a single white envelope on her desk. Inside, a pair of tickets to an exclusive art gala held annually at the Whitmore estate, an event reserved for the ultra-wealthy, where CEOs broker deals over champagne and priceless paintings. On the card, one line written in confident script, "You won't be a secret." Jenna stared at it for a long time. Then she picked up the phone and called the stylist from Madison Avenue. The Whitmore estate stood like a palace carved from moonlight. Lanterns flickered along the marble walkway, and the grand double doors opened into a world Jenna had only ever glimpsed through magazine spreads. Velvet-draped parlors, live strings echoing through golden archways, and guests who wore old money like perfume. She stepped from the car in a midnight blue gown that whispered across the stone with every movement. Her hair was swept up, pinned with silver that caught the light when she turned her head. The stylist had murmured something about Parisian elegance, but Jenna barely remembered the rest. All she could think about was the man waiting for her at the top of the steps. Xander wore a black tuxedo tailored so precisely it looked like it had been made with only him in mind. When he saw her approach, his expression shifted, not surprise, not approval, but something deeper. Like he was seeing something he hadn't dared hope for. "You look like you own the room," he said as she reached him. "I don't," she replied, her voice steady, "but I know how to walk through one now." He offered his arm, and she took it without hesitation. Inside, the world narrowed to champagne flutes, soft laughter, and the hum of unseen power. Jenna kept her shoulders straight, her chin lifted, every movement precise. Xander didn't hover or guide her, he simply matched her pace, as if they had always walked together like this. They spoke with venture capitalists and gallery patrons, nodded politely to senators and tech moguls. No one questioned her presence. No one needed to. Xander introduced her only once and simply said, "This is Jenna Hartley," no title, no explanation. But the way he said her name made it clear she belonged beside him. Near the back of the estate, A terrace overlooked a manicured garden strung with lights. Jenna stepped out for air. The strings inside were playing something slow and aching, and the breeze carried a whisper of it through the hedges. "I meant what I said," came Xander's voice behind her. "You're not a secret." She turned slightly. "Then what am I?" He stepped beside her, his eyes shadowed by the glow of the terrace lamps. "You're the only person who's ever made this life feel real." She didn't answer right away. The scent of roses drifted from the garden. "You've built your world out of glass and steel, controlled, precise. I'm not either of those things." "You're the only thing that cuts through the noise," he said. "You don't bend, you don't flatter, you challenge me without trying." She looked up at him. "And if I challenge you in ways you don't like, I'll still want you beside me." His voice was quiet. "Especially then." They stood there for a moment, caught in something neither of them tried to name. Then a deep voice called Xander's name from inside, one of the board members already moving toward them. Xander turned toward the door, then hesitated. "Come with me." "No," she said gently. "Go do what you need to. I'm not here to orbit you." He paused for a beat, then nodded once and disappeared through the doors. Jenna remained on the terrace, watching the garden lights sway. It wasn't fear that twisted in her chest, it was the sharp, sudden knowledge that she could lose herself in this. In him. And she didn't want to be another woman who gave up everything for a man who had everything. When she returned inside, a waiter handed her a folded card. Her name was written across it in unmistakable handwriting, basement. 20 minutes. She frowned, heart pulsing faster. 20 minutes later, she slipped down the back staircase of the estate. The marble turned to stone, the gold to candlelight. At the base of the stairs, a heavy wooden door stood ajar. She pushed it open. Inside, a single room glowed with soft amber light. It wasn't a basement, it was a private gallery. And on the far wall hung a massive canvas, abstract but unmistakable. A stormy skyline, a woman walking alone beneath it, head held high. She stepped toward it, breath caught. "This is yours," said Xander from behind her. She turned. He stood there with a small envelope in hand. "I commissioned it the day after Boston. I told the artist to paint what I saw when I first realized I was falling in love with you." She stared at him, speechless. He stepped closer. "You forced me to see the world differently. You reminded me that control isn't the same as meaning. And I don't want to keep building something if I can't share it with someone who sees through every facade I've ever worn." He held out the envelope. Inside, a deed, her name, a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights. She looked up sharply. "What is this?" "I bought it for the business," he said. "Officially, but the truth is I wanted you to have space. Real space, a home that doesn't ask you to shrink to fit inside it." Her voice broke. "I never asked for any of this." "I know," he said. "That's why it matters." She stared at him, eyes burning. "What if I say yes? What happens after this? I'll spend the rest of my life proving I meant every word." She stepped toward him slowly, stopping just inches away. "You don't have to buy me anything else." "I won't," he said. "But I'll never stop giving you what matters." She kissed him, not out of impulse but certainty. And when his arms came around her, it wasn't possession, it was recognition. Like two people who had finally stopped running from what they already were. 2 weeks later, the company issued a quiet press release. No headlines, no spectacle, just a photograph of them side by side, hands clasped. She still woke up some mornings wondering if it had all been a dream. But then she'd roll over and find him beside her, reading contracts with his reading glasses perched on the edge of his nose, and he'd say, "If you're thinking of going back to temp work, I'll have to start bribing people." She never did. Because somewhere between the boardrooms and bottomless coffee cups, between misfiled schedules and midnight flights, Jenna Hartley had stopped surviving and started living. The morning sun stretched across the hardwood floors of the Brooklyn brownstone, casting golden lines over the walls Jenna had painted herself. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, stirring a pot of coffee, still in one of Xander's black dress shirts, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The silence wasn't empty, it was full of something warm, lived in, real, Behind her, she heard footsteps descending the stairs. "You're up early," Xander said, his voice still gravelly from sleep. He leaned in and pressed a kiss to her bare shoulder before stepping around to grab a mug. "I have a meeting with the Literacy Grant Board this morning. I didn't want to be late," she said, pouring the coffee and sliding a mug toward him. "And you have that Venture Summit call with Berlin at 8. He took a sip and gave a quiet nod. "Already moved it to 9. "I didn't want to miss breakfast." Jenner raised an eyebrow. "You eat breakfast now?" "I do when you make it." She smiled, then turned to pull croissants from the oven. "I've been thinking about the proposal from the foundation," she said. "They want me to join the board full-time. It's not Kallis Industries, but they're building something that matters." He leaned against the counter watching her. "Do you want it?" "I do," she said, setting the tray down. "It's a chance to help people before they are stuck. Before they feel like surviving is the only option." "Then take it," he said. "I don't need you in my shadow, Jenna. I need you lit up by something that's yours." She paused, then looked up at him. "You know, I used to think being with someone like you would mean giving up control. And now I know you were never trying to control me," she said. "You were just waiting for me to take the lead." He reached for her hand. "You've always been leading." "I just finally caught up." They ate together quietly, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Later that afternoon, Jenna walked into the bright conference room at the Literacy Foundation's headquarters, this time not as a guest advisor, but as the newest permanent board member. She spoke with clarity, led the discussion on student outreach programs, and by the end of the meeting, the entire board had voted to move forward with her pilot initiative for community book hubs. When she returned to the brownstone that evening, Xander was already home. She found him in the living room, wearing jeans and a navy sweater, typing something on his laptop. He looked up as she entered, setting the computer aside. "How'd it go?" "They voted," she said. "Unanimously." He stood and crossed the room to her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Of course they did. I thought I'd feel overwhelmed, but instead I feel," she paused. "Like you're exactly where you're supposed to be," she nodded. He took her hand and led her to the patio, where fairy lights stretched across the trellis and soft music played from the speakers overhead. A small table was set for 2, candles flickering in the breeze. "You did all this?" she asked. "I promised I'd never stop giving you what matters." He pulled out her chair and poured her a glass of wine, then sat across from her. For the first time, there was no looming deadline, no hidden motive, no expectation, just space, and him. After dinner, he stood and held out his hand. "Dance with me." "There's no one watching," she said. "Exactly," he whispered. She stepped into his arms and they swayed to the soft rhythm of the music. He rested his hand at the small of her back and she laid her cheek against his chest. "I used to think love was supposed to be loud," she murmured. "But this is better. It's real," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "and it's never leaving." She tilted her head back to look at him. "You know, you never officially asked me," he raised an eyebrow. "Asked you what? To marry you." He went still. Then he stepped back, reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this for weeks," he said, "waiting for the right moment." She covered her mouth as he opened it. A single diamond set in a delicate platinum band, simple and breathtaking all at once. "I don't want a world without you in it," he said. "I don't want to build anything that doesn't include your name on every wall. Jenna Hartley, will you marry me?" Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't hesitate. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and she threw her arms around him, laughter breaking through her tears. He held her tight, grounding her like he always did. They were married 6 months later in a rooftop garden overlooking the East River. The ceremony was small, just a few close friends, the board members who'd become like family, and the employees who'd watched Jenna go from Temp to Titan. Dana cried. Ellen gave a toast that made everyone laugh. The sky turned lavender as they said their vows, and when Xander kissed her, it was like the entire city paused to honor it. They didn't leave for a month-long honeymoon or disappear to a private island. Instead, they stayed in Brooklyn. She built her literacy hubs. He restructured Kallis Industries to fund education programs across the country. They hosted community dinners in the brownstone and spent Sunday mornings in bed with books and croissants. One afternoon, almost a year later, Jenna stood in the same kitchen where it had all begun. She was barefoot again, this time humming to herself as she sorted through a box of children's books. Xander walked in, holding a small bundle in his arms, wrapped in a soft green blanket. "She's asleep," he whispered. "Out cold." Jenna smiled and took the baby from him, cradling her daughter against her chest. "She's always peaceful when you're holding her." "She's yours," he said simply. "Of course she's peaceful." She looked up at him, heart full. "Can you believe this is our life?" He kissed her forehead, then the baby's. "I've believed in you since the moment you told me not to waste your time." She laughed softly. "You really don't know how to quit, do you? Not when it comes to you." Outside, the city kept moving cars, people, lights. But inside the brownstone, time slowed. Jenna leaned into the man who had once challenged her to speak up, who had met her fire with his own, and eventually gave her the space to build a world neither of them had imagined alone. And in that quiet, perfect moment, with their daughter between them and the weight of the past now behind them, Jenna knew one thing for certain: she hadn't just fallen for the billionaire. She'd built forever with him.